U.S. Marines found Japanese diary-learned enemy feared flamethrowers more than atomic bombs. February 23, 1945. North slopes of Suribachi, Iwo Jima. The wind off the ash plain carried the stink of cordite and the sweet, sick rot of things recently alive. We had just taken a squat concrete pillbox whose slit still smoked from our last burst. The sand here was not sand at all, but ground pumice, black and weightless, swallowing our boots to the ankles and squeaking underfoot like a bad dream. Someone's canteen hissed where it had split against hot steel. My hands would not stop trembling, not from fear, at least that is what I told myself, but from the grinding fatigue of 6 days spent measuring out hours and yards. I was Lance Corporal Robert Dunlap then, 20 years old and older than that, a Flame Team rifle escort who had learned to listen for a certain intake of breath before the hose went live. We moved bunker to bunker in a rhythm that felt like a prayer said too many times. Clear the roof, check the spider holes, kick the loose rock away from the embrasures. Inside this one, the air still tasted burnt. A helmet lay upside down in a drift of ash, and beside it, a leather notebook no bigger than a field dressing. I wiped the soot with my sleeve and saw that the cover was slick with a film of something I preferred to call oil. I didn't read Japanese, but I knew drawings when I saw them. The first page was a man on fire. Not a stick figure, not a child scrawl, but the particular bent of limbs a body takes when heat seizes it by every nerve at once. Mouth open, hands clawed, a smear of orange pencil the artist must have hoarded like a secret. Beneath, a rush of characters scored hard enough to groove the paper. I called for the sergeant, and the sergeant called for S2, and by late afternoon, a military intelligence service lieutenant with a California face and a Kansai tongue crouched in the bunker's shadow and turned each page like it might break. His name was Thomas Sakamoto. He read quietly at first, lips moving, the way a man checks a prayer for blasphemy. Then his breath hitched. He pointed without touching. Here, 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 the same word appearing in different hands, different days, Oni, demon, and another Jigoku, hell. He kept reading, slower now, as if to make the sentences behave. The diarist wrote about nights spent listening to our tanks exhale, about the sound napalm makes when it finds a seam in concrete, about the way flames steal air before they take flesh. He wrote that the emperor's soldiers were not afraid to die, but they feared meeting death in fire, because fire made a man beg and forget the name of his father. A staff colonel ducked inside, impatient with our sudden scholarship. What's so important it can't wait for the next objective? Sakamoto did not look up. Sir, he said, they fear the flamethrower more than they fear annihilation. The colonel snorted, the kind of sound men make when they think they've heard exaggeration. They don't even know about the new bomb, Sakamoto added, almost to himself. Then he turned the last page, and the bunker seemed to narrow around us. It was English, jagged and wet and, God help me, polite. Fire is worse than death. The words had bled through to the board beneath as if they wanted to keep going. I felt the tremor run from my palms into the notebook. Somewhere outside, a corpsman shouted for morphine, and somewhere else, a Zippo coughed to life, the throat clear of a machine that had ended more arguments than any speech. Sakamoto closed the diary the way you close a friend's eyes. Above us, the mountain breathed sulfur. Below, the island's veins of tunnel and stone waited for our next footfall. I slipped the notebook into my pack without asking permission. It weighed almost nothing and more than I could carry. We moved on because war is nothing if not the refusal to stay in one place. But the sentence came with me, repeating against my ribs each time I stumbled, "Fire is worse than death." That night, when the stars refused to show through the ash haze and the sea pounded a rhythm we could not match, I asked myself a question I did not want answered. What kind of weapon makes an enemy pray for obliteration instead? Before the island and the tunnels and the kind of heat that changes the way you think, I was Bobby from a town where the tracks split the map and the smell of cut hay drifted in through the screens each August. My mother kept the good plates in a cabinet that clicked when it closed. My father fixed things that other men gave up on, radios, tractors, a kitchen clock that had lost its hour hand. He said that if you listen long enough, a machine will tell you what is wrong with it. I believed him because boys believe the first truths they are given. I turned 18 on a Wednesday and signed my name that same week. The newspapers said the Pacific was dotted with names I could not pronounce, and the Atlantic was swallowing ships whole. At the station, my mother folded a handkerchief into my pocket without ceremony. The train carried us away from the square water of our lake to a coastline where the air stung like iodine. At Camp Pendleton, they taught us how to make a bed so tight it could bounce a coin and how to turn a rifle into something that belonged to your shoulder. I learned the way packs settle on hips, the taste of canteen water warmed by the sun, the sound a man makes in the dark when homesickness surprises him and he does not want to share it with anyone. I did not arrive with a hero's heart. I arrived with the ordinary mixture, fear of being seen as weak and a hunger to prove that I could carry my part. The first time I met the Flamethrower, it was in a yawning classroom built of boards and salt air, the kind of place where everything smells faintly of rope. The instructors spoke about pressure and mixture, about valves and igniters, about the way napalm clings and the way it cannot be argued with once it has decided to burn. I signed up as escort because my hands were good at reading the mood of a machine and because the man who carries the rifle beside the hose is the one who makes room for the nozzle to find its mark. That was what I told myself. The truth was simpler. I wanted to stand close to the center of the work and still have a chance to come home. We shipped out on a gray morning that acted like it had no opinion. The ocean was a flat sheet made of cold metal. I learned the names of the men I would eat beside and sleep beside and, if it came to it, die beside. There was McCrae, who kept his letters in a tin of peppermints and never offered the candy to anyone, and Lopez, who could take apart a Browning blindfolded, and a quiet kid from Minnesota who could smell rain through tar and paint. We played cards with stakes that were mostly laughter. We pretended to believe rumors because rumors are the small controllable fires you light when the world is too large and uncertain. In training, they showed us film of earlier landings. The instructors paused the reel when a man chose well and when a man chose poorly. They talked about fields of fire and enfilade and the mathematics of angles. No one talked about the noise that comes up through your boots when a tank moves over rock or the way the ground keeps a memory of footsteps long after the men have moved on. No one talked about the first time your nose tells you the truth about burned fabric and burned skin and how your stomach negotiates with that truth. I wrote home that I was fine. I told my father that the engines aboard ship sounded healthy, that you could feel when a bearing needed grease just by resting your palm on the housing. He wrote back to say that your hands would save you more times than your mouth, and I held the paper like it could transfer the smell of his workbench across the ocean. What did I believe before Iwo Jima? I believed that dying bravely mattered. I believed that suffering was something that visited other people and then left. I believed that weapons were tools and that men chose their meaning. On the southern beach, on the first day, when the volcanic sand swallowed the soles of our boots and mortars walked toward us like someone counting, I felt those beliefs loosen, not fall away, not yet, but loosen, as if the island were fingering the knots in my thinking and deciding which to pull. The first week on Iwo, fatigue folded itself into the corners of every hour. You learned to sleep near explosions because that meant the shells had already arrived. You learned to measure distance by how long it took for the sound to catch up with the flash. You learned that hunger is a small animal you keep in your pocket and feed with crackers and stubbornness. I carried the diary after we found it, not as a trophy, but as an object that asked a question I could not yet form. It rode against the small of my back and warm there, and I wondered about the man who had written it, what his handwriting looked like before the tunnels and the smoke, whether he had a father who fixed the unfixable. I was not yet changed in a way a stranger could see, but inside, something cautious had begun. It was the beginning of a new kind of listening, a listening not just for enemy movement or for the cough of an engine, but for the sentence the war was composing in me, one clause at a time. It had something to do with fire and with the way men face it, and it had something to do with mercy and the way men ration it when mercy becomes dangerous. The first time I saw the flamethrower used for real, the noise reached me before the sight of it. It was not the crack of a rifle or the boom of a mortar. It was a drawn-out cough, a mechanical roar that rolled across the ridge like something alive and angry. February 24th, the second morning after we found the diary. The sky was the color of dirty metal. Our platoon was ordered to clear a set of pillboxes guarding the approaches to Airfield No. 1. The maps said light resistance. The maps were wrong. We had moved barely 50 yards beyond the sulfur vent when the world tilted. A hidden gun opened from the flank, cutting down the man on point. McCrae fell sideways into the ash, his body jerking once and then still. The ground was so hot, the blood hissed where it landed. For a moment, no one moved. Then instinct, training, whatever you call it, snapped us forward. The bunker was a low rectangle, part stone, part concrete, with firing slits so narrow you could not see the faces inside, only the flash of muzzle light. We tried grenades. They bounced off the entrance and rolled back toward us, sputtering like angry toys. The smoke was so thick it clung to the inside of my mouth. Every breath tasted of iron. Sergeant O'Donnell barked for the flamethrower. Donnelly, the operator, was a short kid from Detroit, all shoulders and no neck, the kind who always volunteered before thinking. He dropped to one knee, turned the valve, and gave the igniter a quick click with his thumb. The spark caught. The hose straightened. What came out was not a flame the way a campfire burns. It was a liquid thing, orange-white at the core, dragging a tail of smoke so dense it looked solid. It splashed against the bunker's lip, rolled inward, and the interior glowed for a heartbeat before erupting. The sound was the part no one ever forgets. It is not a scream so much as every note of pain pressed together until it becomes one continuous pitch. It cuts through everything, gunfire, orders, your own thoughts. The bunker pulsed with that noise for 10 seconds, maybe 12, then stopped. We waited. The air trembled with heat. Then 3 figures lurched out through the doorway, their uniforms burning like rags soaked in oil. They ran a few steps, fell, rose again, fell once more. I remember thinking that they were trying to find water, though the nearest surf was half a mile away. Donnelly lowered the hose. Nobody spoke. When it was done, O'Donnell sent me to check the position. Inside, the walls were black glass. Rifles leaned against them, half melted. There was no air left, only a stench that filled your lungs like liquid. I backed out and vomited until my ribs hurt. That night, as we dug foxholes in the slope above the airfield, the talk circled the same point. How effective it had been. How fast it ended the fight. No one mentioned what we had heard inside the bunker. Donnelly sat apart, cleaning the nozzle with a strip of rag. His face was gray under the grime. When someone asked if he was all right, he said, "It works," and nothing else. Sleep didn't come. Each time my eyes closed, I saw the interior of that bunker relit, the flame replaying, the figures running nowhere. I thought of the diary again, the sketch of the burning man, and wondered if that artist had seen what I had just seen from the other side of the fire. By dawn, the smell still hung over the slope. The sun came up red, filtered through the haze, and for a second it looked like the whole island was made of ember. I remember thinking that the war had just spoken its true language and that I had finally learned one of its words. War, when it stretches beyond the first shock, becomes a kind of weather. You live inside it, and it seeps into your skin until you forget what the air used to taste like. After that bunker, we moved yard by yard up the slopes of Iwo Jima, the black sand grinding under our boots, the smoke crawling into every seam of fabric. Sleep came in scraps, 10 minutes behind a rock, 20 under a wrecked track. The horizon was always on fire somewhere. The pattern was always the same. We advanced by inches, met resistance, stalled, burned it out, then moved again. Each bunker was built from the bones of the island itself. Concrete, lava rock, timber scavenged from cargo crates, and connected to the next by tunnels we couldn't see. You could clear one and still have the same enemy appear behind you an hour later. The island breathed men through stone. Our flamethrower teams became the point of every push. Donnelly, O'Donnell, and I were assigned to Charlie Company's bunker clearing detail. We carried what looked like tools of hell. The tank rig, twin cylinders full of pressurized gasoline thickened with napalm, a wand like a metal serpent. When it fired, the recoil pressed into your bones. You could feel the pressure wave push through the air and into your ribs. I learned the choreography of the job. 2 riflemen, myself and Lopez, kept the flanks tight. Donnelly advanced, shoulders bent, his pace steady as if walking into wind. The hiss came first, then the bloom, and for a few seconds, everything disappeared inside the orange. After each blast, we waited for the counterattack that rarely came. The men inside rarely made it long enough to shoot back. By the second week, the island had turned into an anatomy lesson. Hills were ribs, ravines, veins. We fought through it as if dissecting a body. I stopped writing home because there was nothing to say that would not have sounded like madness. The letters that did arrive from home felt like they belonged to another lifetime. My mother wrote about the first thaw back in Illinois, the creek breaking loose, the robins returning. I read the words under a tarp, slick with condensation, and could not picture a color that wasn't gray or red. Sometimes, between attacks, we'd find traces of the men who had lived inside those bunkers, rice still warm from the heat of our fire, chopsticks whittled smooth by hand, little flags of the rising sun folded in pockets, the edges charred. Once, in a pocket dugout near Hill 362, we found a photograph of 3 Japanese children standing in snow. Their faces were serious in that way children look when told to hold still. Donnelly stared at it for a long time before passing it to me. "They look cold," he said, then tucked it into his own jacket. He never spoke of it again. The days blurred. We ate when we could, mostly K rations that tasted of cardboard and cigarettes. Our skin cracked from the salt and the sulfur. The only water was what we boiled from canteens filled at captured cisterns, and it always carried the taste of iron. I stopped feeling clean. Everything I touched smelled of smoke. The Japanese fought with a logic that defied the manuals. They rarely surrendered, rarely retreated. They fired until they ran out of ammunition and then charged into the flame, trying to drag a man down with them. They were ghosts made of discipline and despair. Once, a soldier burst from a side tunnel, his clothes already smoldering from an earlier blast. He clutched a grenade in both hands, ran 5 steps toward Donnelly, and vanished in a puff of gray dust and metal. The explosion barely lifted the sand. At night, we heard voices echoing from the tunnels, chanting, sometimes singing. The sound came through the vents, low and rhythmic. O'Donnell said it was prayer. Lopez said it was madness. I thought it was both. It made the hair on my arms rise each time because it was proof that there were still living men under our feet, breathing the same stale air, waiting for us to bring the flame down on them. By then I understood what Sakamoto had meant when he said they feared fire more than death. Death was an end. Fire was a sentence carried out slowly. You could hear the difference in the way they fought. The moment they saw the nozzle rise, their firing stopped. Even snipers abandoned their perches when the tanks hissed open. They would take bullets to the chest without flinching, but they could not face the idea of burning. One morning, after a heavy bombardment, we found a series of caves on the island's north side. The entrance was narrow, lined with sandbags blackened by soot. We thought it empty, until a hand came out holding a white cloth, not a flag, not quite. The fingers trembled. O'Donnell hesitated. Donnelly stepped forward, flame gun lowered. A young Japanese soldier crawled out, his face pale beneath the grime. He held the cloth higher, muttering in Japanese. Then another figure appeared behind him, older, thinner, eyes hollow, and the first man turned and shot him point blank in the chest before turning the pistol on himself. We stood frozen. Smoke curled from the cave mouth. The sand shifted around their bodies as if the island itself was trying to swallow the evidence. Lopez whispered, "He saved us the trouble." But none of us moved for a long while. That night, when I wrote in my field book, I caught myself writing the same line twice without realizing it. There is no right way to end a life. I closed the notebook, wiped the grime from my hands, and lay back to watch the tracers climb across the sky like falling stars that had lost their sense of direction. Each day was another repetition of that truth. The fire, the silence afterward, the uneasy gratitude that it was them and not us. You start to live in the space between those facts. You start to understand that war isn't a battle of good and evil. It's a contest between who can keep believing in purpose the longest. By the end of that week, Donnelly's hands had started to shake even when he wasn't firing. He said it was just the cold, though the air was hot enough to blister skin. O'Donnell sent him to the rear for a day's rest. He came back quieter, eyes sunk deep, and the photograph of those children was gone. He never said where. This was the rhythm of Iwo Jima. Advance, burn, bury, repeat. The land itself resisted memory. Whatever we built, foxholes, trenches, even our graves, collapsed back into the ash. It was as if the island wanted to erase us as quickly as we erased the men defending it. By the time we reached the northern ridges, Iwo Jima had devoured everything that could be measured: ammunition, daylight, men. The air was a permanent twilight, a mix of dust and burned fuel that turned the sun into a dull orange bruise. We were half deaf from shellfire, half blind from smoke, and half convinced that the island itself wanted to keep us there forever. March 2nd. Our orders were to clear a chain of connected tunnels running beneath Hill 362A, Kuribayashi's last defensive line. Intelligence said the complex extended nearly half a mile underground. In truth, it might as well have stretched to the core of the earth. Donnelly was pale and silent that morning. His gloves were stiff with soot, the fingers blackened. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. "One more line," he kept muttering, "then we're done." We all knew he didn't mean the line on the map. He meant the invisible line between what you can live with and what you can't. The entrance to the tunnel was a jagged scar in the hillside, wide enough for one man to crouch through. The heat coming out of it felt alive, like the breath of some wounded thing. We could hear voices inside, muffled, maybe 6 or 7 men. O'Donnell ordered us forward. Donnelly went first, hose ready, and I followed with the rifle. The tunnel was so narrow our packs scraped both walls. The air tasted of metal and damp ash. 30 feet in, the passage forked. The right branch sloped down, the left up. O'Donnell gestured left. As we moved, a burst of gunfire flashed from the right fork. The rounds hit the wall beside my head, showering sparks. Donnelly dropped to a knee and swung the nozzle toward the sound. I remember shouting for him to wait. There were echoes. It was too tight, but the hiss of pressure drowned me out. The tunnel bloomed white-orange. The flame rolled like liquid, filling the right branch in a single exhale. The heat hit my face a second later, like opening an oven the size of a house. There was a roar, then a sudden pop, the kind you hear when metal collapses. The roof of the branch gave way, coughing smoke and dust. For a few seconds, all we could hear were the screams inside, muffled by rock. Then silence. Donnelly slumped back against the wall, his mask dripping condensation. His eyes were wild, reflecting the firelight. "They were shooting," he whispered. "They were shooting." We crawled deeper, turning corners that felt endless. Every 50 feet, another alcove, another heap of rifles, another figure curled against the wall. Some still smoked, their skin cracked like clay. Others had no marks at all, men who had suffocated before the fire reached them. The ground under our knees was soft with ash and something else. Near the far chamber, we found them, a group of 5, 3 adults, 2 barely more than boys. One of the older men wore an officer's insignia. He sat upright against the wall, his pistol in his lap, the barrel still in his mouth. In his other hand, he held a photograph, a woman and a child, smiling stiffly in front of a temple gate. The edges had curled from heat, but not burned. O'Donnell told us to collect the documents. I hesitated. Donnelly reached down, picked up the photo, and tucked it into his vest beside the picture of the 3 children from the snow. He had a family, he said. His voice cracked on the word family. We made it out after 2 hours, lungs scraped raw. Outside, the wind was cold for the first time in weeks. Donnelly set the tank down and walked to the edge of the ridge overlooking the sea. He stood there a long time, helmet off, the breeze flattening his hair. When I called his name, he didn't turn. That night, he sat beside the cook fire, staring into the flames like they might speak back. I heard them, he said finally, inside that tunnel, not fighting, praying. I think they knew, no one replied. What could we say? We were all part of the same machine, one side feeding fuel, the other feeding faith. And the gears turned until one side stopped moving. 2 days later, Donnelly was gone. No one saw him leave the line, but in the morning, his flamethrower stood upright in the sand like a grave marker. O'Donnell listed him as missing in action. Some said he wandered into the tunnels. Others said he walked to the cliffs and kept walking. I never learned which. That was the moment the war stopped being something I did and became something that owned me. I had crossed the line Donnelly talked about. Each fire I lit afterward felt less like survival and more like confession. The diary in my pack grew heavier, its edges soaked from sweat and rain. Sometimes, when I opened it at night, I could smell smoke rising from the pages as if the paper remembered what it had seen. We took the island a few weeks later. The flag went up on Suribachi, and the papers called it victory. But victory has a taste like burnt metal. It sticks to your tongue and doesn't wash away. By the time the last bunker fell, I could no longer tell if the fire I carried was still just in the weapon or had found a place inside me too. The silence after the last shot is never pure. It trembles. It waits for you to notice that it isn't really silence at all, just the echo of what used to be noise. When the fighting finally burned itself out on Iwo Jima, the island didn't celebrate. It exhaled. We were ordered to hold our position along the northern cliffs until the engineers cleared the remaining tunnels. The air had cooled. The ash hardened into gray crust underfoot. Every few hours, another small detonation sounded in the distance. Booby traps, delayed charges, collapsed caves. But they were faint now, background noise like the ticking of a watch you've forgotten to wind. I spent most of those days walking among what was left. The ground was pitted with craters filled with rainwater slicked red from rust and blood. Helmets lay half-buried, rifles twisted into strange shapes, dog tags without names. Each object felt heavier than its weight, as though it had absorbed the density of everything that had happened here. One morning, O'Donnell handed me a shovel. "Graves detail," he said. "We buried our own first, rows marked by rough wooden crosses cut from ammo crates. Then we began on the others. The Japanese dead outnumbered ours many times over, and we didn't have enough markers for them. The chaplain read the same words for both sides, because the dead don't care about language. By the 5th day, the smell had settled into our clothes. You could scrub your hands raw and still carry it with you. We worked mostly in silence. Every now and then, the wind would shift, and the scent of fuel would come back from somewhere, the reminder of how most of them had died. I could still hear the hiss of the valves, the hollow pop before the roar, like a ghost breathing down my neck. One evening, I found Donnelly's flamethrower again. The tank had been half buried by the shifting sand, but the serial number was still legible. I stood there a long time, thinking about the photograph he'd carried, the one of the 3 children. I wondered if someone, somewhere, was still waiting for him to come home. I wondered the same about the man in the tunnel, the one with the photograph of his own family. For a moment, the difference between them blurred into nothing. When I brought the Japanese diary to the field HQ for cataloging, the intelligence officer flipped through it, nodded once, and tagged it for translation. He didn't read the last page. I thought about telling him, but what would it change? The sentence was already etched into me. Fire is worse than death. That night, the rain came. It fell without pattern, steaming where it touched the warm ground, running down into the foxholes like tears from a place too high to name. I sat in my shelter and watched it turn the ash to mud. Around me, the men slept, or pretended to. Someone mumbled in his dream. Someone else whispered a prayer for home. The following morning, the ships began to pull away from the beachhead. The island was ours, though it looked like something no one should ever want. The flag atop Suribachi was still there, stiff in the breeze, its colors dulled by dust. I tried to feel what the papers back home would call pride, but all I felt was a hollow kind of relief. We had survived, that was all. Survival wasn't victory. It was simply what came next. On our last night ashore, O'Donnell brought out a bottle of medicinal alcohol someone had requisitioned. We passed it around, each man drinking without toasts. When it reached me, I looked into the bottle and saw my reflection distorted by the liquid. For an instant, it looked like the surface of that bunker wall, wavy, scorched, unsteady. I took a swallow and handed it on. The sea glowed faintly under the moon, and for the first time in weeks, the horizon was clean. No smoke, no fire, no sound. I should have felt peace. Instead, the quiet scared me, because in the quiet, the voices came back, the ones we'd burned away, the ones that never stopped calling through the dark. When I finally slept, I dreamed of the tunnel. Only this time, the fire was behind me, chasing, and the air ahead was filled with cold rain that never reached my skin. The war had ended for the island, but not for us. It had simply changed shape. It had moved inside, waiting. When the ships pulled away from Iwo Jima, the horizon looked too clean to be real. We stood on deck in silence, watching the island shrink into the haze. No one cheered. Some men waved. Most just stared, as if trying to convince themselves it had ever been a real place. We were going home, or at least to the next version of it. The Pacific kept rolling beneath us, long and slow, like it had all the time in the world to erase what we'd done. I kept the diary in my pack, wrapped in an oilcloth, its pages brittle with salt. It was the only thing that felt heavier at sea than it had on land. When we docked in Pearl Harbor, they gave us clean uniforms, hot food, and a lecture about discipline and decorum. A chaplain stood at the dock and spoke about duty, about how we had fought for freedom. I nodded along, but inside the words rang hollow. Freedom was a word too light for what we had seen. Back in the States, people wanted stories. They wanted to hear about courage, victory, the flag on Suribachi. They wanted the version that fit neatly between breakfast and the evening news. No one wanted to know about the smell that lingered on your skin or the sound a man makes when fire finds him. I learned quickly how to edit myself. I talked about the noise of the surf, the teamwork, the discipline. I left out the screams. The nightmares came with me. For years, The hiss of a gas stove could pull me straight back to that tunnel. A neighbor burning leaves once made me drop to the ground before I knew why. I tried to explain it once to a woman I almost married, but her eyes clouded before I finished. We didn't speak of it again. Time dulled some things, sharpened others. The world moved on. There were new wars, new weapons, new enemies. The M2 flamethrower was replaced by rockets and napalm bombs that did the same job from farther away. We found more efficient ways to burn without seeing the faces. But the principle stayed the same. We learned to destroy without watching it happen, and we called that progress. In 1952, I visited Arlington for the dedication of the Marine Corps War Memorial, the bronze of the flag raising. People stood in their Sunday clothes, pointing and smiling. The sculpture was perfect, every fold of cloth, every straining muscle. But as I looked up, all I could see was the ridge behind it, black and smoking, and the men who never left it, the ones without statues, the ones whose names burned away with their bodies. Later that year, I went to Quantico. In a glass case at the Marine Corps Museum, behind the medals and unit patches, I saw the diary again. Someone had translated its pages and placed it open to the last line. The ink had faded, but you could still read the English letters written in a trembling hand. Fire is worse than death. A small plaque beneath it said, "Recovered on Iwo Jima, 1945. No mention of who had found it. That felt right. The diary didn't belong to any one of us. It belonged to the war itself. I stood there a long time, listening to the echo of visitors' footsteps, watching their reflections move across the glass. They leaned in, read the line, and moved on to the next exhibit. I wondered if any of them understood that the sentence wasn't just written, it was lived on both sides of the flame. Sometimes I think about Donnelly, about the man in the tunnel, about the two photographs that might still lie somewhere under that volcanic soil, fused together by heat. I like to imagine that the sea, in its slow way, has carried some trace of them across the world, spreading ashes into every current until no one could tell which belonged to whom. Maybe that's the closest thing to forgiveness that war ever gives. I'm an old man now. My hands still shake, though not from fear. When I close my eyes, I can still see the glow that filled those tunnels, but I've stopped trying to put it out. It's part of me, the same way a scar becomes part of the skin. History remembers dates and victories. It forgets the smell of smoke on your hands, the sound of prayer turning to screams, the quiet after. But the ground remembers. The soil keeps everything. And sometimes, on cold nights when the wind is right, I swear I can still smell the ash of that island, as if the world itself hasn't quite forgiven us for what we had to do. That was a long time ago. The sea has erased the footprints, and the island has gone quiet. The photographs, the rifles, the diary, they're all museum pieces now, lined up under glass for people to look at for a moment before walking away. I understand. It's easier that way. But for me, the war never truly ended. It's there in small things. The way my heart stutters at the sound of a match striking, the way I watch every sunrise as if measuring how much light the world still deserves. Sometimes I still dream of the bunker, the flicker, the heat, the silence after. And then I wake up and remember that I'm one of the few left to tell it. I kept the diary's last line written on a slip of paper in my wallet for years. Fire is worse than death. I don't carry it anymore, but I know it by heart. Those 5 words carry all the weight of what we did and what it cost us. They remind me that courage and horror can share the same breath, and that mercy, once lost, takes a lifetime to find again. If you've listened this far, wherever you are, you've carried the story with me for a little while. And maybe that's the only kind of redemption that war ever allows, to remember together, to not turn away. So tell me, as you sit there in your room or on the train or wherever this story has found you, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Because stories like this don't belong to the soldiers anymore. They belong to everyone who still believes that remembering might be a way to keep the fire from starting again.